up, guys? This is Dion Brown, and you are listening and or watching Man versus Brand. So there's an interesting idea that's floating in the universe, right? That's out there where people embrace this idea of the startup or entrepreneurship as a way of avoiding some level of discipline. They think that being an entrepreneur allows them to clock in when they want, take vacations whenever they like, that there's no accountability, no responsibility, except for the vision, right? This idea that there is this all-encompassing, forward-thinking, interesting, life-affirming, universe-shifting concept that because I, as an entrepreneur, am the author of it, that I don't have to have some level of responsibility. Well, I, in fact, want to speak to someone who can talk to us about what it is to be disciplined. What does that actually mean? What does it involve? Who is the author of your own fate, and what does it mean to be an entrepreneur? Does it mean that we now have carte blanche to be loose with our time, to no longer lead generate, no longer time block, to just be willy-nilly out in the universe? I'm talking to Jason Skeesick. He has a podcast. He's ex-military or veteran. He has spent his time and energy developing communities, fostering conversation, allowing himself to be vulnerable and to create this sense of tribe, not only with other entrepreneurs, but with people like you and me. I'm going to talk to him about what it actually means to be disciplined in this era of the entrepreneur. I want to know what the spirit of the puppy means. It's this philosophy that he has. I'm interested to hear what that actually means. And I want you guys to leave understanding how you can apply the military mindset to your own venture or business. If you like, guys, I want you to tune into this episode. I want you to share it. I want you to make sure that you're subscribed if you're watching this on YouTube. And let's start the conversation. Jason, what's going on, buddy?
Oh, Dion, you honor me, sir. I am so excited to be here. That was an incredibly warm welcome, and I appreciate it. And not for nothing, your intro video is also super dope. So shout out to you, brother. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
I love the topics you introduced, and obviously am just pumped up to discuss them with you here today.
All right, cool, man. So listen, let's talk a bit about your own background, right? So before we hop into what it is to be disciplined as the military instills in our young folks, what got you there? Like, what got you from, the start of life to a point wherein you recognize that the military might be an option for you, and you actually went through that decision? And what did that decision reveal about yourself?
Yeah, so I think the answer to that question you sort of already touched on, and that is the spirit of the puppy. This is this thing that I was born with. It's one of the two core values that I have that describe me as a person. And I was born with boundless energy. I love adventure. I love meeting new people and trying new things. And so I had all the passion in the world for these things that were serving me in no real way. So I learned when I was a kid that I loved snowboarding. I worked at the snowboarding hill. I loved cars. I worked at the shop. I liked clothes. I worked at the mall. I liked poker and pool. I gambled for a living for a little while right out of high school. And this was all great to have this energy and passion, but there was just no guiding force. There was nothing, no discipline, nothing that was actually taking me in a trajectory. And so in a moment of clarity, my mother and I decided, like so many young men and women before me, that I needed to go out and find some discipline in the form of joining the United States Army. And boy, Dion, did I find it in the Army. That is absolutely, without a doubt, true. And that's where I earned my second core value, which you've already alluded to, which I call spirit, or I'm sorry, which I call which I call military mindset, which is like discipline, hard work, stepping forward when there's an opportunity for to take responsibility, and making sure that we live up to those folks who are, counting on us.
So there are some possible like misconceptions or possibly truths about what it is to join the military. So I have a couple questions to ask, and you can kind of let me know, sort of your personal lived experience, right?
Yeah.
Did you decide to go to the military because you had no other prospects in your life for college and or vocation, job? Was this kind of like this is the best of no options, or was this something that you went into sort of fully understanding that it could be life-changing for you in a way that you needed it to?
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely had plenty of options, but more and more I see people in the forms of the systems that they're putting into the world. And I can tell you at that time, my system, which was to raise a couple of bucks and go gamble in pool or poker, it was very quickly settling me down back to zero. I was not getting anywhere with that. So I had all the opportunity in the world, but the system I was employing had no structure, had no results that were taking me where I wanted to go. And I didn't see another flag that was reaching out to me to grab it. And so when the military sort of presented itself to me, it looked like, and I think it's to this day, I think it was the best option for me to go in, to start from scratch and rebuild the habits that ultimately lead to me and the system that I employ now.
Got it. So what about those who say that joining the military takes away individual thought in a way that it may not necessarily produce independent vision, right? So how does one join a unit where you're really focused on this collective mindset, this collective sort of application of mind, energy, and resource? And how do you then translate that into something that feels a little more independent in the way that you are free thinking and solving a problem that exists in the market, exists in the world, but you're doing it without being given an order or being given a directive? You are, in fact, doing this on your own. So is there any sort of correlation to that?
Tons. And so what I would say for starters is, as a young person, the biggest thing you can do is just shut your mouth and listen and watch, right? Watch by others, learn from others. This is how we pick up how to be in the world. There's a portion of our life where our identity is so much attributed to us by what people tell us. Hey, you're smart, you're tall, you're athletic, whatever it is, you're strong. And by what we see in others that we see in virtue. And so my role models at this time were poker players and pool players, and maybe not the best people to try and emulate. And so by changing my environment, which is certainly the fastest way to change yourself, I was presented with all these virtuous examples. Now, true, I didn't have a bevy of different options at any given moment in time, but it was only through learning the discipline. Like, you want to talk about SOPs, in your business or in your life, try learning exactly the right way to fold your socks, exactly the right way to make your bed, etc. And so while I didn't need more than 4 years of that structure, the 4 years that I got were perfect for empowering me to understand how to go forth and solve problems. And I'll cap it off with this. Most entrepreneurs, or at least those of us that think of ourselves as born entrepreneurs, are like a painter with the world as our canvas. The military or other structures provides the rubric, the edges of that painting, or creates, you go from long form spoken word to like a haiku. And I have to tell you that the constraints are where the art really lives, in my opinion.
So yeah, I agree with that in so much that I think for folks that are pursuing a purely academic pathway to success, you learn some fundamental skill sets. You have to learn long-term discipline, have to learn goal setting. You have to learn how to create community. You have to understand when you are moving independently and when you need a support structure, right? And when you do those things, I think academically you will eventually succeed and you will come out of it with whatever level of degree that you're interested in. I think that for non-traditional applications of that, you still ultimately need the same things, right? The same skill sets apply. Like you need to be able to have a goal and see that goal through. You need to be able to be disciplined enough to see that goal, regardless of whether that's a 6-month goal or a 5 or 4-year goal. You need to find and build community. You need to figure out when you need support and when you don't. And so I think that, like, to your point, the method in which you get that, specifically for entrepreneurs, may vary, right? This may come out of a traditional institution. It may come out of military experience. It may come out of general life philosophy. Like this may just be built into you, right? And so this idea that an entrepreneur can be that the entrepreneurial mindset can be crafted in different ways, I think is true, because ultimately the fundamentals still remain the fundamentals, right? Like if you're going at this by yourself and you can't build a strong team around you, then it doesn't really matter how forward thinking your thoughts are, what solutions they solve or they address. Your idea won't go very far because you haven't really learned that skill set. Or if you have really great ideas but you lack the ability to see those ideas through, regardless of the time frame, then you're going to have really great ideas, but you're going to have no follow through, right? And so I 100% agree that in this idea that there is a structure around the painting, and I think that there are so many different pathways to get to that structure in order for you to paint the best painting possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I would also carry that on and say, if you want to be a good leader, it behooves you to be a good follower. If you want to be a good guest at a restaurant, well, you should spend some time having been a bar back or a server, right? And so one of the unique things about the military is you enlist for 4 years, let's just say, for the sake of this debate. You enlist for 4 years, which means once I'm in, I chose to be here. Once I'm in, I don't get to pick what the mission is. I don't get to pick necessarily how we do it. I don't get to pick who I'm working next to, but it's gonna get done. The military is what happens when ruthless execution doesn't care about, has less care about the fallout of that. And it's pretty amazing what you can accomplish in that regard. Once I went through that, once I enlisted for those 4 years, and now I got to choose the mission and choose the people that I spent time building it with and choose how we went about doing it, I had so much more power because now I could apply those concepts that worked for anybody to the people who I loved and who I enjoyed working with on a mission that I loved and enjoyed fulfilling to the world. And so that's why now when I talk to young entrepreneurs, I ask them, what is the big idea that you're excited about now? And it'll be, oh, we're going to be Netflix for Uber and we're going to have Airbnbs for, you get the idea, like whatever the new idea is. Great. Awesome. Because all good ideas have merit, most. Enlist in energizing that idea. Go down the path, enter that gauntlet, and do not exit until it is done.
So when we talk about the military mindset, what immediately comes to mind is maybe a part of the process that I find to be most problematic for a lot of entrepreneurs that I work with, which is the stage after ideation, but before market viability, right? There's a period of time that sits after you have created this idea, you have evangelized this idea to friends and family. They all said it was great. You took that to a mentor, you shopped it through some entrepreneur workshops, and you're like, this is a great idea. And then almost everyone departs, and it's just you and your process.
Yeah.
And no one else is going to see this thing until you have developed it in a way that you feel comfortable to show its most minimal or its maximum potential, right? So you're like, I'm going to bring it to market, whatever that thing looks like. And it's in that sort of mid period where I think writers tend to sit, or authors tend to sit as they're writing their work, right? Or entrepreneurs sit as they're fleshing through their idea, where it becomes easy to not be accountable to the idea, to be undisciplined to the idea, to do everything else, right? To iterate all the marketing and business plans, but actually haven't worked through the concept in a way that allows for it to move forward. And a lot of it, I think, is because of discipline, right? Like folks just don't like to sit down for a bit and work through the work.
Yeah. So, Dion, for you to even ask me that question, and we don't know each other that well, but for you to even ask me that question tells me about what you've seen and how much you know, because I can tell you right now, candidly, I go into a float tank once a month typically, and I think about, I take my business and my relationships and I blow it up like a big engine diagram. I look at its constituents parts and I try to put it back together in the most efficient way I can. And dude, is there trauma when you're going through that? I mean, this is a part of me, right? And so, no joke, last Friday, and I think what we make is great. I think my course is great. I think my mastermind is a quickly growing tribe of entrepreneurs. We're building a digital city of problem solvers. I'm really excited about it, but man, I'm in that float. And all I can think about is how it's not right yet. It's not good enough yet. And all I can see when I talk to 10 entrepreneurs and 6 sign up is that I didn't help the 4 other ones. And that I am who I say I am. And we do what we say we do. And so what's the worst thing in the world, Dion, is when somebody else mistakes us for not. And so, you know, if I'm this valley of despair, which is what you're referring to is commonly called, is such a real thing. And that's how you can separate the real ones from the folks that are going to end up toiling in this kind of spiral of perpetual ideation and execution, right? And so, you know, to those people who find themselves in that place, just know that I know where you're at. And I think Dion knows where you're at based on even asking this question. And it's every public speaker that's been an entrepreneur that you've ever heard talked about the struggle that they encountered early on, or they talked about how they had to change if they wanted to expect bigger results. This is real. And I can tell you from the thick of it, I'm feeling it. It's worth it, but it's brutal.
Very much so. And I think it's funny, right? Because a bit of it exists as a tangible thing, right? A tangible goal, benchmark, idea that you're moving forward. A bit of it is cerebral. A bit of it is all of the stuff that's in your mind about how you feel about it, the emotions about it. Are you excited about it, right? And in a way, you are moving through these 2 very separate but entangled ways of approaching it, right? So you're like, here's the tangible stuff, right? Like, for instance, like I may have an idea and it may be like a digital idea. So I'm moving into development on it, and that's the tangible part of it. But the intangible part of it is or the emotional part of it is, I want to get this thing done by June. And we are right now in May, and I'm sort of stressing out and I'm questioning, you know, am I going to get it done in time? And, you know, all of the expectation around the launch that I've created in my head, or with the user testing that I have in my head, right? And so oftentimes I think we apply this kind of emotional weight, or this emotional expectation on what we want to produce. And that can be very much in conflict with what's tangibly in front of us, and how we can sort of best serve our idea, our business, our concept, in order for it to have the highest likelihood of success, right? And to me, with the military mindset, that's all about discipline, right? Like, can we quiet our emotional reaction in order to see through the logical steps that we've probably already put in place?
Yeah, I mean, and I would also just add that you may find yourself standing in front of a boulder that you don't feel like you can get past. but imagine a long enough timeline with big enough stakes, and that boulder becomes a pebble. And so entrepreneurs, discipline's a big part of it, but it's also the fearlessness of like, we're going to sandblast away everything that's BS. And so you have to get really ruthless about the way you look inside of who you are and the ideas that you have. And when something, you cannot hide from questions. Your business is going to ask you a series of questions. And if you do not answer those questions satisfactorily, you will not have a business that thrives. And I think a lot of times people that get stuck trying to seek comfort as entrepreneurs very quickly find that they reach a ceiling. It's those folks who are willing to break through those ceilings, which are so much about looking at yourself with and your baby, your business ruthlessly, without caring about if it's going to hurt your feelings personally or not. I need to know now. I want to know now. Is this not good? Because if it's not, I'll make it better. And when it's good to you, is it good to somebody that's even more, going to scrutinize it or whatever? And so
Yeah.
I just think that, I love the idea of this intertangled, duality of the experience. I would just also say that, like, it's really simple and really difficult at the same time.
Absolutely, man. I think that to your point about who's going to scrutinize it more, right? Like, the easiest thing is to go to people who have an emotional attachment to you and ask if the thing that you're doing is valuable, right? And because they are invested in you, right? Unless, okay, caveats, right? Unless this is a coach, a mentor, someone for whom objectivity is a part of the relationship and baked into the relationship, then you may have a higher likelihood of someone sort of applying critical thought to your idea. But on the whole, if you're asking Aunt Sarah's going to be like, baby, that thing is amazing. Oh my God, it's going to change the world. Yep. It is beautiful. I'm going to tell all my friends about it. And Aunt Sarah has no incentive to tell anybody about it unless she's like a super advocate and that she's a connector and that's who Aunt Sarah is going to be. And she's always been that way. And if somebody bakes a good pie, she's going to tell everybody in the neighborhood about a good pie. The reality is that most people that you're emotionally attached to, that you are in relationship with, that is in your network, in a way, they are incentivized due to the relationship to give you a version of response and or reaction that they believe will be easily consumed by you if they love you, right? If they love you. It's the person that is connected to that person 3 people away, 2 people away, right? So it's Aunt Sarah's son's wife's coworker that's going to tell you the truth, because there is some level of connection, but there's no real emotional attachment and there's nothing really at stake for them to tell you the truth and to give you their honest opinion about that thing. So I think to Jason's point, man, like, we have to be aware, right, of the people that we're sharing our ideas to, our concepts to, that are doing our QAs, our betas, that are just helping us iterate the best idea. We have to make sure that we're getting a wide spectrum of opinion and relationship, so that we're not only serving the part of the population that is within our network that is also incentivized to give us the critique and or response that will make us feel good and not necessarily make the product, business, idea better.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything you do, you can choose comfort now in exchange for pain later, or you can take the difficult road now and have comfort later. And so, yeah, if you want Aunt Susan or whatever reference you use to tell you how great you are, great. Well, then when you launch that product or that business or that service or that thing and crickets chirp, well, then you know what's happening. And if you want, but if you want to create a buoyant business, and my definition of a buoyant business is one that, you know, with little friction grows kind of effortlessly. It doesn't matter. Are you paying for ads? Are you using referrals or organic or going on podcasts, whatever? You will find that if people like the thing that you offer, they're going to share it with friends. They're going to stick around. They're going to ask for more ways to hire you. You're going to see this buoyancy lift your business, and it makes things a lot more effortless. But it's the effort you put at the front of that creates that actually creates that capital T truth in your product, which the people you're trying to serve will relate to. And so if you want to find that sooner, then you should be toiling through the most difficult part when you're going through the building phase. Otherwise, now you're going to have to go like, you can fix the boat before you put it in the water, or you can wait until it's in the water and then try to figure out where the leaks are. But, you know, to me, I'd much rather really scrutinize that hull before we drop it in the water.
So I want to get into the military mindset, but your allegory, your example, this idea of the boat sort of inspires in me a question around, when do we present an idea in the market versus when we iterate it consistently amongst ourselves and our network, right? And so I'll give you an example, right? So I have a really great idea. I have had this idea for about 3 years. I have flowcharted it. I have iterated around it, right? Like, at what point in your experience or in your opinion do you launch it and find out where the holes are versus hold on to it, trying to determine for your own opinion where the holes are, right? Because those are two very different concepts. And I like your example of the boat, because I think we oftentimes find ourselves in that boat, right? Where we're like, do I launch the boat with all the things that I know about it? Or do I keep the boat and keep working on it in the hopes that, like, I'm sending out something that is drown proof? So at what point, like, is there a timeline? Is there a moment, an aha moment, where when you're working through an idea, you're like, I think that I have done the most amount of ideation, discovery, thought process around this, and I really need to launch this boat, and where the holes are, I'll plug them, but this is the boat that I have, and I'm going to go with this boat?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so for starters, I think I would start by saying it depends. Let's just use that metaphor and say, if you literally build boats, you better make sure there's no holes in them before you sell them. That's a given. If you're making AEDs or like incubators for babies, like, dude, figure it out first, test it on something, and then let's talk. But when it comes to most entrepreneurs these days, which are leveraging, you know, ones and zeros, right? We're leveraging platforms, we're leveraging code, and to some extent human capital. When it comes to that, you know, I'm actually not even going to give you my opinion, because I'm not Gary Vee or Alex Hormozy or, you know, Tony Robbins, but every single one of those people will tell you there's no better time to start than today. And there's no reason why starting tomorrow would somehow be better. And so what I would say is, I definitely believe in building the plane while it's flying in the right context. And so from the context of throwing out products or creating a service or even some brick and mortar stuff, right? Put it out there, create that, you know, minimum viable product, you know, from the lean startup methodology of what is the one thing that we can get fielded immediately, and then start to get dirty from there, because you're going to rapidly iterate. And so the thing I would say is, you do want to fail faster, because failure is what creates the diamond that we ultimately want to become.
And to your point, man, I think that, like, the beauty of the minimally viable product or the MVP is that the market doesn't need to know the minutia, the intricate details of your idea to determine whether it will be valuable and solve a problem in their life.
Yeah.
Right? Like they don't need everything. They don't need everything that's going to come with the app. They just need to understand the way the app will function, the way it'll apply in their life, the ease of use, and they can tell you, nah, there's something else that already solves that for me, or man, this sounds like something I want to sign up for. And so sometimes it's just as easy as like creating a landing page that goes, here's the issue, here's the solution. If you'd like to know more about this solution, sign up to subscribe to this list, right? And you can start to see in how people react to that thing, whether your just core idea is something in which people can really get and huddle around, whether you can create a community around that idea and then extend that community into something that solves a larger problem for a greater population.
Yeah, that's a really good kind of Tim Ferrissian way to look at it, for sure, where you create this you just put it out into the world and you see if people want it. Particularly when you talk about, and this is not something I'm particularly experienced with, but like very high capital expenditure businesses. Like, I want to know if kids are going to like this toy before I go get injection molding designs and all the other things that are going to go into that. I want to know if I'm going to build a website that's all about counting macros. I want to know that people are going to want to use it, right? And so I couldn't agree more that you do want to do some market research. I would also say that, no matter who you are, you shouldn't be your beta test group or people that you talk to about this thing in the early stages should be your avatar. And so not just should be your avatar, but you should really know your avatar. And I would argue that I know people that have been in business for decades that honestly don't exactly know how to articulate who their avatar is. And that's troublesome.
Yeah. And not only because I think your avatar is important, Jason, I think that like through your avatar, you find cohorts, you find other people that are in other segments that act and look like this person, but that are not exactly the same thing, right? So they are similar in respect to maybe how they view the world, but they may be different age groups. They may have different professions, right? But when you kind of understand that idea around your avatar, then you can start to look for these connecting points in other groups and other individual types that say, okay, this person or this market has a high probability of having a strong positive reaction to what I'm providing because there's some crossover, there's some parallel with the group that I really, really understand as my core audience or my avatar.
Yes.
All right, cool.
Totally agree. I did that on purpose because it was like, you just said it, man. Like, you nailed it.
I appreciate it, brother. So let's talk about the military mindset, man.
Sure.
Tell me about that. Tell us about what the military mindset is, and maybe give us 3 or 4 points that really sort of highlight what this thing means for you, right?
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
No. Give us your sort of your understanding of it, and then maybe some points in which you think are really powerful and can be applied right now.
Yeah, so military mindset, as I covered earlier, is kind of the counter for me of Spirit of the Puppy. So Spirit of the Puppy is all energy and adventure and passion and making friends and trying new things and having hobbies and enjoying life now. And the military mindset is sort of the balance to that. It's the discipline. It's showing up early. It's taking responsibility. It's living up to the covenants that we make with ourselves and our constituents, others, right? I think ultimately those two things combine to form what I've called Spear and Clover, which is the logo on my hat. And it's this symbol that's tattooed on my arm. And so the story there is, the 2 core values, Spirit of the Puppy and military mindset, which I talk about frequently. One day I was out rucking with my 2 dogs, and I got 40 pounds on my back. I got a 40-pound log on my shoulder, and I'm hoofing. We're going 11 miles through the Indiana Dunes National Park here where I live, and my dogs are having the time of their life. So I'm super focused on achieving this very difficult goal, and the dogs are like running out into the woods, and they're playing around, and they're checking on me, and then they're running back in the woods, and they're checking on me. And I think it's really not military mindset or spirit of the puppy, as much as it's the combination of those two things. It's not just going out and working hard towards our goals and living up to those responsibilities that we have in life, but it's also taking time to enjoy it and expand the horizons and find passions and create meaningful relationships and enjoy your life now. And so for me, for my business, for my podcast, for my mastermind, those folks that I most identify with are not just military mindset, and they're not just spirit of the puppy, but they're this intertwined combination of the two.
All right, so can I give you some thoughts that I have around what you just described?
Yeah, please.
Audience, can I do that? Are we okay with that? Okay.
Bring it on, dude.
All right, cool. So the first thing is that the spirit of the puppy feels, in addition to all of the things that you described, also to me sounds like this kind of play and learn philosophy, right? Where puppies, as they're playing, they're also understanding the tenets around growing and socialization and hierarchy and aggression, and they're just learning things about what it is to interact in the world, right? Where there is structure and order, and their job is sort of figure out where they sit, and that's whether it's a pack or whether it's with an owner, right? Is where do I fit in to this kind of hierarchy, right? And then when I hear about, you know, the military mindset, I think, like, you know, sort of after that playful stage where you understand where you are, right? Like, and you're fitting into the hierarchy. Now it's how do I bring value to that hierarchy, right? Like, how do I figure out where I am in that space? Now, what's beautiful is this Clover Spear idea, because the Clover, to me, it brings up sort of imagery of like the 4-leaf clover, which kind of speaks to like luck and fortune and kind of and all of that is kind of premised under the idea that it may not necessarily be intentional, but it sort of happens and we react to it. Where the spear is very much this space of discipline and intention and use of and discipline around, you know, the spear can be both deadly in the way that it's used for warfare, or it can be beneficial in the way that it captures fish for eating, right? And so this idea that, you know, the world also exists in this duality of playfulness and learning and experiential learning, and also discipline and hierarchy. And the world also exists in a space where there's fortune and luck and the universe is moving, but there's also this space where you decide how you want to apply that movement, how you want to apply the way the universe is doing it, and you can do it in a way that is warfare. You can do it in a way that you're catching fish, or you can do both, right? And so much of our choices in life then inform, you know, how much of the spear or how much of the clover, how much of what we learned as youth or puppies, and how much of what we have is around our discipline and understanding of hierarchy. And so I feel like whether you're an entrepreneur or you're in college or you're 12 or you're 86, it feels like this idea could apply to anyone because it's centered around a lot of fundamental ideas, I think, to being a happy, productive, well-informed person in your own life, not in the life of others, but just in your own life, man. So I like the imagery. I like the ideas because I think it brings up, at least for me, some really strong imagery and ideas around kind of growth in a process of becoming who you want to be.
Yeah, that's super valuable to me, and I appreciate that analysis because I don't think anybody's ever really broken it down back to me in quite that way. What I would add too is, you know, for the Clover's perspective, play is the building blocks for how we learn life. It's for any mammal, at least that I'm aware of, plays when they're a baby, but we can continue to play and learn life at a higher and higher level as we go through it. And so unless you view yourself as some fixed point in space, you know, you should always be playing and practicing. And like, what if I became a millionaire? Oh, that'd be fun. Like, how would that be? I don't know. It'd probably be like this. And oh, it turns out it's kind of like that or whatever. And then the spear, that's really sort of the rule book, right? Like, this is how you go through, you know, energizing these things that you want to put out into the world in such a way that's like virtuous and consistent and like lives up to what its promises are. And so those two things combine as well. Again, you're kind of tapping into some things that I think were there for me, but I hadn't really, you know, vocalized yet. So I appreciate that.
No, man, listen, like this is your idea, right? And so
but you're dead on. You're dead on. Yeah.
No, but I appreciate it, man. I mean, I think that ideas for me feel like art, right? Like so much of it is about where someone was at the time, what was going on in the world at that moment, where they were as a person, right? And all we do is see that idea and we start to correlate it to things that we how we understand the world, right?
Yeah.
What's happening in our space and universe. And so I think that like what you're developing in these ideas, where the clover and the spear and the puppy and the military mindset may not seem obviously intersected, I think that there's some beautiful intersections there, right? And I think that like when we apply that to entrepreneurship and or life, right, we are looking at what I feel like is progress, right? And I think that progress is what we should all sort of aim for. To your point around being a fixed point, right, in space or time, right? Like it is cool, I think, to want to be a monument. It's cool, but that may not necessarily give you the result that you intend, because to be a monument is to be fixed, is to be unmoving, is to lack growth. And so, when we talk about things like legacy, we tend to think about it as I want monuments, right? Versus like I want growth. I want someone to take my idea and iterate something that's more amazing from it and better from it, right? And we want to be these things that are just there and everlasting, instead of things that are fluid and that grow and that become. Because I don't know, I think for a lot of us, we're afraid that when we leave this earth, that we then that the things that we have done erode. And so our job becomes to fix something that is permanent, right? In the world, right? That is a testament to us existing in this plane, instead of possibly asking ourselves, what can we do that has the biggest influence on whatever our point of influence is, right? Large populations, small populations, networks, families, whatever. And how do we empower those that we want to influence to take what we have created and to iterate something that is resonant to who they are, to their experiences, to their life, right? And in a way, we may not all be Rockefellers, right? But we all have the ability to be ever present in the way that our ideas, our business techniques, our products are with and changing and growing and living far beyond what we have actually produced ourselves.
Yeah, I think to take your very big idea and to bring it very small, if you want to be associated as a memory to anybody, if you want to be associated with what is good and right and virtuous, in every interaction that you have where you find yourself at odds with somebody, don't choose to be right, choose to join ally yourself with the correct side. And so this is a shift that happened for me about maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where I stopped trying to be right all the time, and I started to open my ears and listen to what was being said by me and the other person. And it only did one or two things. One, it reinforced that I was in fact correct, and great, we move forward as friends. Or two, I realized I'm wrong, and oh great, now we're shoulder to shoulder, and I'm aligned with you. But it really what you're talking about, Dion, is on a bigger scale, from impact of your business to a smaller scale of impact in an individual relationship, in every interaction. If you can accumulate more and more situations where you find yourself aligned with what is right, not just what you think, then I think ultimately your legacy will be one that people will carry forward. And at its best, if we're thinking about this from like a creation perspective, I can create a statue, which is immovable, or I can create the rules to a game, which is inevitable and infinite, right? And so like, I'd far rather be known for the guy who created the game of chess than for the guy that carved the statue of David or something like that.
So talk to me, Jason. What would you like your legacy to be? Or what are you moving toward in your own idea of legacy?
Yeah, this is a good question, and it's one that I think about a little bit, mostly just when I'm on podcasts, because this gets asked sometimes. I think I'll probably answer it differently in 10 years, but for now, my answer is this. When I look back at my CrossFit gym, which I ran for 12 and a half years before selling it in 2020, the thing that my legacy is there are really the babies that are walking around that their parents met in our tribe, or the people when I see on Facebook that people are like out with my best friends, and I know everybody in that picture met as a result of being a part of our community. Now I think of in terms of business babies. I'm connecting people with other people that launch businesses. I'm helping people to rough out and then polish ideas that become great organizations. And so ultimately, I don't have a strong drive to be like overtly remembered, but if I can leave a legacy of business babies, literal babies, relationships and organizations, and maybe even, a way of life behind, I think that would be a legacy that I would love.
So I think that that's amazing. I also question that how much do we as entrepreneurs, as podcasters, as thought leaders, as whatever it is that you want to, however you want to sort of categorize yourself, right? How much of what we do is determined by reach versus impact or value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so there are a bunch of individuals for whom reach is the metric. And reach can be amount of people that sign up for funnels, read a book, signed up for a class, whatever, right? And the more reach we have, the more prominent our ideas are in the universe, zeitgeist, whatever it is you want to call it, right? And there's some folks for whom reach isn't the question; it's about value. It's about like, yo, I might have only influenced 35 people, but man, those 35 people got from me this true sense of who I am, this true sense of philosophy, right? Where we have imparted to that individual group some sense of the way that we see the world. And so how do you balance between this idea of reach versus this idea of value?
If I could kill my ego, and I've tried, if I could kill my ego, it would be 100% value. Because if you ask me, the question you're asking basically boils down to, would I rather have 100 million followers like a Kardashian type or something, or would I rather have very few people know my name but really change lives, this Mother Teresa thing or something, right? And the answer is just, if ego weren't a factor, it's the Mother Teresa thing, right? It's what percentage of the world knows the Nike swoosh? Okay, get that number in your head. It's like 70%, 80%, whatever. What percentage of people in the world know Phil Knight? I would argue Phil Knight is one of the more successful, people in terms of reach, but it was because the ideas bore through merit and were assaulted and assailed and evolved over time to the point where they've become undeniable and scalable, because all entrepreneurs should have two words echoing in their head, and I can tell you that I do, and that is undeniable and scale. If you can hit those two things, you are completely unstoppable. And so reach is from scale, but undeniability is a requirement if you're going to do anything of merit and worthwhile.
So with that sort of thinking, right, following that line of thought, a bit of the job then is to divorce our individual selves from our ideas. Right?
I'm gonna ask you to remove a bit of all of.
Right. Because that is right. So now, in order for our ideas to live on, for them to be challenged, and for there to be this sense of undeniability, this thing probably needs to exist beyond our own lifespan, right? To be able to iterate something that exists to the point of a Nike, where most people don't know who created Nike, but they understand the brand, and the brand has gone through enough iterations that it lives beyond the person who thought of the idea.
Yep.
And so, is that what we're require? Is that a part of the requirements of creating an idea that we want to live beyond our own life? Is to divorce ourselves of our own. Are we asking to be Papa John's? We're like, well, maybe I might actually hit a point where I am detrimental and or problematic to my own idea, right? Are we asking ourselves to not be Blockbuster, where we're like, no, this is the only way this thing is going to work, and then the market tells us otherwise, and our resistance to follow what the market wants is what sort of leaves us out of this legacy, right? Like, is it about sort of divorcing our own ego, but also our own scale of vision?
Yeah. So first of all, if you're listening to this up until now, you're getting a real treat, because Dion's kicking the shit out of this interview right now. Like, you're so present, man. This is such good, valuable stuff, and I've done a lot of these, man. This is really great. I appreciate you, and I appreciate being seen by you today, buddy. But for starters, I would say this. This is not to give like a participation trophy, but there is a purpose for every tool in the shed, man. And so if you just want to draw paintings because you like drawing paintings and never sell one of them, that is the result. If you want to be, Elon Musk and leave this legacy of, multi-planetary panspermia or something, well, that's the result too. But if your question is leaning towards on the spectrum of, let's call it capital G greatness, then yeah, actually, I think there will always be one speed limit at any given time in any business, and eventually you become that speed limit. I think Papa John's is a good example of that. I don't even really know that story very well. I just know that, yeah, he definitely ended up being the problem, right? Or you could look at Greg Glassman from CrossFit, or any number of these fallible human beings, because ultimately you're talking about, you have a choice. And this is why Spear and Clover is the name of the company. It's not Jason Skeesick's coaching company, because at the end of the day, these ideas can be purified. This human being is fallible and flawed and dirty. And so, at the end of the day, I'm only capable of so much, but there is principles that are limitless and scalable. And so if your goal is to take things very far, then separation from your ego is crucial. And what I can tell you as someone who does several different things to try and put down my ego is that when you are successful at it, there is no knowledge that you've ever held more purely than when your ego isn't in the way to paint it in the wrong light. There just isn't. I mean, there's so many things that and we could get real esoteric here, but I'll try not to. I'm just skimming the surface. But like, whether it's float tanks or meditation or vinyasa yoga or taking psychedelics, any of those things, when you find that place where it's not you experiencing something, but it's us, dude, there's just no hiding between that. There is no buffer. And so from that, this is why you hear about Steve Jobs taking acid and, using a whiteboard to come up with all these, super fundamental, but purely truthful products.
All right. So I kind of want to be messy for a second.
Fuck it. Let's go, buddy.
There's certain things that I feel like just listen. I'm not gonna parse this out for a soundbite because I won't do that to you, Jason. But I'm always interested in hearing about people's take on things. And you may say like, listen, I don't have a take, or I'm not comfortable taking on this. But if you do have a take, I would be neglectful not to ask. So, Wounded Warrior Project.
Okay.
Beneficial IP protecting nonprofit or bully?
I don't know. You got to have to give me more frame of reference than that. I don't know.
No, listen, if that's not in your scope of thought, then I completely
no. So let me hit that real quick. I think I recall some years ago some knowledge about they were misappropriating some funds or something. Man, I'm not qualified in any way. It's not really been on my radar. Can you tell me a little bit more color about that?
Yeah. So basically, the organization spent a lot of resources and energy and time creating cease and desist for other organizations that were similarly named that helped that helped veterans that were wounded in order to get funded. And so there was a question around IP that said, could you use the name Wounded? Could you imply wounded? Could you imply warrior? Could you imply veteran status and put those two things together? And does that, in fact, create some level of cannibalism for this larger kind of nonprofit charity that supports those people? And when folks are regionally donating to these sort of charities, does that then remove resources from the larger overall charity because they're similarly named? But if you don't know anything, I'm not going to tie you into this because
I can speak to that point though. What I can speak to that point is this, and that is like, human beings are respond to their incentives and their the things that are in their environment. And so when we create a corporation or we create a nonprofit or we create a brand or we create a thing, we can create it from all the right intentions, but then all of a sudden there are incentives. Right. And so you see this in the form of what you just described, right? Like, so we've created this thing and it's going to be, all virtuous and we're going to give X% back to veterans and we're on this virtuous mission. I could understand where the leader of that organization, or certainly the legal team of that organization, would look at somebody across the street doing something similar, but maybe not along their whatever in their sandbox, and say, no, we have to protect this. We have to grow it to as much as we can. We have this like ethical responsibility to maximize our impact as a brand because that's the charter. Well, it's the same thing as when you hear about, a CEO whose incentive plan is tied to stock price. Okay, well, all of a sudden November rolls around and we start to make decisions that are driving the stock price, not the best interest of the shareholders. And so there are messy situations when we try to weave together these series of incentives aligned with different constituents from different places. And so, whether that's how I teach my daughter how to be potty trained, or whether that's how I go through tort reform or something, it almost doesn't really matter. It's just the fact remains that human beings typically behave in their own interest. And when we align things like business organizations, we are forced to define sort of structures around incentives, whether it's the legal system or whether it's how I train my daughter how to go to the bathroom. And so once we do that, we have these unwanted outcomes. These are called externalities, right? And so, there are externalities where, like, listen, I'm not a litigious guy, but if I walked into a restaurant and there was a super wet floor and a dark floor and like uneven steps, and I slipped and broke my hip, I would never want to sue them. but all of a sudden my alignment is against theirs. And so what I would say there is like, if you find yourself at odds with another virtuous person or another person that's on the path, my first default, if I'm giving you the interest or the benefit of the doubt, is like, well, crap. Here we like, if me and you had a fender bender, Dion, like, man, I like you a lot, but let's say neither of us have insurance and we get into a car accident. Now we're at odds, and you know we don't want that to be the case, but we do have dueling incentives, and so it's one of those things where, you know, do I from strength, would I like to think that you take the high road and you don't sue the company who's just trying to do good? Yeah. But from scarcity or from the way that things are actually in black and white, I can understand the path where we end up, you know, not shoulder to shoulder. I don't live like that. I've got like 5 or 6 ex-partners floating around and I'm still friends with all of them. So I would rather take the shorter end of the stick and feel good about myself going to sleep at night, if that answers anything to do with your
No, I think that's great, man. I mean, I it's one of those things where I think folks tend to like either have like a guttural kind of reaction to it, or they're just like, that's not really, I'm not really in that space, right? And so I find that like it's good to ask because I think it's a really interesting cross section of veteran status and entrepreneur, right? Is how do you look at IP? How do you view service, right? And ability of reach and scale of service versus other people that are trying to service the same thing, right? Like at some point, Uber had to look at Lyft and go, that's interesting. Or Uber had to look at DoorDash and go, that's interesting, right? The question then becomes, how do you feel about it? How much of what they do you feel like is informed by what you have done? From an intellectual property standpoint, and how much of it is just inspired, right, by your solution and someone saying, well, hey, though you have created a solution for this, maybe your reach doesn't allow you to get this segment. I'm going to create a similar solution that will reach this portion of the population and serve their needs, right? Because ultimately, you know, a lot of us are out here trying to iterate the best idea, but not having sole ownership of the idea.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's like I create a coaching program. Other coaching programs have been created. The question then becomes, what do I use as my value proposition, and do I believe that what I'm doing is serving an underserved population, or possibly doing something better and or different than what has been served? And then can someone say to me, well, the thing that I did not create, you cannot also create, because what you are trying to create has been informed by what I've created, which is ultimately informed by what someone else has done in the past.
Yeah. So to react to that, what I would say is this is sort of, as a capitalist, this is a very interesting discussion, and you can see where this extrapolates out. So if we look backwards first to kind of set the stage, there was a time where it was like, hey man, I wrote a book by hand. This is unbelievable. And somebody else would be like, wow, I wrote a book too. And it's like, it was so crazy that in a human life, you were able to gather enough resources that you could even think about things to write a book, right? This was like a cherished and hallowed thing. And through technology, first agriculture and industrial revolution and all these things, and now, you know, ones and zeros, right? We see that these margins are bleeding over closer and closer and closer together to now where it's like, yeah, I could see a world where Amazon honestly kind of just extrapolates out and runs everything, or, you know, Apple or whoever. Well, what happens when that's now AI, where it's not just bleeding together? It's not limited by one person's idea. It's not limited by one collective group that is fallible and flawed. It's maybe becomes closer and closer to perfect. And so that question is a good one, because I was standing at a very libertarian-ish, entrepreneurial, free thinker, capitalist group of people. And I hope he hears this, but I doubt he will. And a guy who was very much that was like, they need to regulate AI. And I go, are you hearing yourself talk right now? You know what I mean? And I know you know where I'm going with this, but that's like, it's like, yeah, I can understand where there's fear of scarcity creeping in when something is just, I mean, this is the train versus John Henry, right? It's just like, John Henry's amazing,
Yeah.
That train doesn't give a crap about John Henry. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
Even though John Henry won that race, I don't think we, John Henry, are going to win that race.
Yeah. All right. So on Man versus Brand, we asked everyone 2 questions. The first is on any streaming platform, podcast, digital book. The idea is that this thing should be accessible to anyone that's listening right now. What's something that you've recently consumed and or engaged in that you thoroughly enjoy?
Is it okay if I give you 2?
Sure.
All right. One is the book Essentialism by Greg McKeown. It's fantastic, and it is the way that we should all be living. And then 2 is the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, which I think is a modern version of Rich Dad Poor Dad. I think that is the smile that will launch another 1,000 ships of entrepreneurs.
All right, so give me those one more time.
It's Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and it's the Almanac of Naval Ravikant.
Got it. Okay, so give me now something that you thoroughly enjoy on any streaming platform, book, podcast that you enjoy, but that people may not necessarily associate with you. Like something that, like, if I ask maybe someone that you're friends with, that maybe in a mastermind with you, they may not know, like, man, Jason really likes this, but man, you thoroughly enjoy it. It's not quite a guilty pleasure.
Moulin Rouge. I don't know. I love the movie Moulin Rouge, and I think that's a pretty soft thing to like for my avatar.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know, man. There's a bunch of books that I find myself going back to. I mean, I reread 1984 and Atlas Shrugged. I've reread Animal Farm, but I think they're kind of on brand for me. So I think probably Moulin Rouge, bro, if we're gonna get cute with it. Or Trolls. I really like Trolls.
All right. So what is it about Moulin Rouge? Is it the story? Is it the musicality? Is
it's that.
All of it? Like,
yeah. Oh, you know, I'm going to change it. I like spoken word poetry. People don't see me there. I used to go to the original slam poetry place called the Green Mill in Chicago every week when I was very young, and have gone back there many times since. And so what I would say to just wipe the table is I love the spoken word poetry stuff. I am a big fan of like deep introspective, like bleeding heart type, you know, emotion in performance and things like that. So that's one that people probably would not associate me and this mustache with.
well, listen, earlier you mentioned spoken word into haiku as like an idea of transition. So when I heard that, I was kind of like, oh, that's an interesting idea, right?
Yeah.
So I definitely see that, man. So listen, anyone who's listening, Jason, and they want to engage in what you have going on, we're going to have show notes and descriptions and all that stuff for everyone here. But why don't you give someone that's listening and or watching right now some ways that they can engage in what you're doing? So if they want to listen to Spear and Clover, if they want to engage in a mastermind, how are they finding what you have going on?
Yeah, for starters, if you're still listening to this, it's because you love Dion and Man versus Brand. This is amazing free content for you that he's pouring his heart and very deep soul into. And so first, I would ask you to like, review, and share this podcast because that's what he eats off of, right? And then second, if you have any energy left after that, please check us out. You can check out the Spear and Clover podcast, which is released on YouTube and across all audio platforms once a week. Or if you're an entrepreneur and you'd like to test drive our mastermind, the Spear and Clover Mastermind has a free test drive. You can find that and register for that at spearandclover.com.
Awesome, man. Listen, guys, if you like what Jason's doing, I would advocate for you to go check his stuff out, man. Listen, we talked about the spirit of the puppet. We talked about the military mindset. We talked about Spear and Clover. We talked about this idea around discipline, around iterating your best idea, around being your best self. If you heard some keywords that really resonated with you, right? That if you understood some of the concepts that we discussed, or if you didn't, This is the time where you can pause this right now and go, hey, I want to learn more. The beautiful thing about discipline is that it also asks of us to be curious, to find more, to learn more. Because as great of a process as we currently have, there is something out there that someone else has done that might help us to get to a better solution. And better isn't a value judgment on what you're currently doing. Better is what it is, right? We get to our best, and that's where we throw the line in the sand, and hopefully that sand erodes and we find something beautiful and marvelous on the other side. I'm Dion Brown. That's Jason Skeesick. This is Man versus Brand. Check out Spear and Clover. Thank you guys so much for listening to the episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Love you guys. Speak to you soon. Bye.